Our next guest joining us on the show is a nationally syndicated columnist. Also, his background, if you need a little bit more on that, was a member of the Georgia State Legislature at one time. Writes about some financial issues as well, which is why Matt Towery is joining us this morning on the program. I do want to note we just dropped down to 31 again. Our temperature bouncing all over the place in the low 30s this morning, and still some snow floating around out there in some areas. 7 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our guest has written a new book called Newsvesting. And first of all, we'd like to say welcome to Matt Towery. And I take it you probably don't get to Idaho much.
No, but I have been there, and it's beautiful. I, of course, have been to Sun Valley, is it?
Oh, yeah.
And actually chose to drive around on my own. And obviously, the topography is tremendously different from Georgia or Florida, the two places I live, which makes it all the more interesting. So I loved it.
Yeah, I moved here from the Eastern Shore, and it's 70 degrees there right now, and but they have no mountains to speak of. Just,
Right.
The trees are the highest thing on the horizon line. Hey,
Right.
Right off the top, you wrote this book because I think you've been observing. Well, first of all, we all have our attitudes, I guess, about media, which some of us happened to see on full display last week on CNBC.
Right.
But financial reporting, too, I'm sure that there are sometimes certain biases there, and financial reporting impacts the way people invest. It impacts the markets. You've written a book, I think, the book Newsvesting is really to help people navigate this minefield, isn't it?
It is. By way of background, I really have been a businessman all of my life. I was CEO of my family's company, which at the time we were one of the larger companies that printed corporate annual reports in the world. We sold in the 1990s when the printing industry was still hot and they were buying companies up left and right. I'm a lawyer also by training, and still I'm a practicing attorney today. And I combine the obviously when you're printing corporate annual reports, you get pretty high into the weeds of corporations and their numbers and the like and how they present them. But moreover, as a lawyer, you're sort of trained to look at issues, apply a rule, apply some analysis, and then come to a conclusion. And in the case of all of this news, I started, by the way, you mentioned I was in politics. I was Newt Gingrich's chairman when he was Speaker of the U.S. House, so I was involved in his political career pretty heavily. And by the time I got out of it all, I decided that I would then join news organizations. I worked with the ABC affiliate in Atlanta, then the NBC, then ABC, and now with Fox, I supply the commentary and the polling for about 5 southeastern large market cities for the Fox affiliate. So in doing all this, I said, gee, there's got to be a way to take all this information and get ahead of the game in making my investments. And we all have investment counselors or advisors. A lot of people are in money market, not money market, but in mutual funds, or they're in some sort of 401k. And a lot of folks say, well, I'll just leave it there and leave it to the professionals, which is great most of the time. But I argue that most people should be newsvestors. They should be looking over their own investments, asking questions and making decisions from time to time that might really impact them in their future. And I'll give you just one great example, Bill. Years ago, in my writing of the column that I write, I was in Florida in the mid-2000s, about 2000, I want to say 2006, early 2006. I gave a speech, headed back to the airport, and I'm driving through downtown Miami. I see all of these big condominiums, but they all have the exact same lights in them. So I asked the driver, what's going on? He said, well, these are all stalled out. These are buildings that no one's completing, and the city made them put these light bulbs in every window so it wouldn't wreck the city skyline. Well, I went back home and wrote my column for Creator Syndicate. This was in March or April of 2006. I said, we have a huge housing crisis on its way. Now, we didn't really realize that till a year later, because but when you get to a hotspot like Florida, you see that going on. That's not just newsvesting. That's really your own investigation. But that's when you start looking for things. And I got out of the market before 2007 and just sold everything I had based on that and other information I started to follow. And that was the beginning of my sort of move towards being a newsvestor.
Some months ago, in fact, I remember reading where the rates for shipping containers around the world were dropping and dropping, obviously because demand was slowing. If you see something like that, you got to take that into account. It's a bit like that Melanie Griffith character in the movie who could look at a newspaper story on page 810 and come to some sort of conclusion about which direction the economy happened to be going.
Right. Well, and that's so often the case. I'll give you another great example. In 2014, July of 2014, and this is, of course, in the book, if you had looked at a USA Today article, you would have read the USA Today article. It's the typical start of summer. Expect gas prices to soar. There's not a lot of volume out there. They're going to be incredibly expensive because people are going to take to the roads in record numbers. Well, what they didn't see, and you'd have to, as a newsvestor, be looking a little more carefully, were that there were plenty of stories starting to come on the horizon. If you just did a Google search on oil, saying that the world was beginning to see a glut of oil. Well, it didn't really hit the major newspapers until around December of last year. And that's when suddenly we realized that this glut was here to stay for quite a while, and the value of a lot of these oil companies, both those that refine oil and those that are petrochemical companies, started to drop. And at first it was like a bouncing ball. And so what I did is I searched out what I thought were the best companies. ExxonMobil is one that has refineries but also extracts oil. And then more importantly, ConocoPhillips, which eliminated all of their refineries. And they're purely in the business of extracting oil and providing that oil. So those two companies pay incredibly high dividends. They have tremendous cash flow. And I felt like they could withstand what could become, as they call it in the business, a falling knife. And indeed, in July, it became a falling knife as we saw oil, for example, ConocoPhillips had been at $80 plus in 2014, well above that at some points. It started bouncing between $60 and $70 throughout the beginning of this year. And then in July, it became a falling knife and got down all the way into the 40s, even to the low 40s. But if you played it right, realizing that in the end that glut is not going to last forever, and that there is going to be sort of a shutting down of the weaker companies that were fracking, for example, in the U.S. And if you really follow right now, very interestingly, if you follow what's going on in Saudi Arabia, where there's really a power struggle going on in that country over the king and other relatives who think that he should leave, I think you're going to see the Saudis change their position on the price of oil. And I think in the next year or so, you're going to see oil come back at least to $60 a barrel or beyond that. And when that happens, all of these stocks that pay these great dividends like ExxonMobil or ConocoPhillips, they will have survived. We will have gotten a great dividend. And if you bought at the right time, you're going to get tremendous return for sticking through it.
Our guest is syndicated columnist and author Matt Towery, joining us this morning on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 34 right now, on our way somewhere into the 40s, we hope, before the end of the day. It's 9:15 and coming up on 9:16. For people who are interested in picking up a copy of Newsvesting, where would they go?
Easy. Go to Amazon.com. We have, in fact, Sunday night at 4 o'clock in the morning, my wife woke me up to inform me that we had hit number one in books on investments on Amazon.com and books on investment analysis, and hit the top 100 releases and business books. So we're excited about it because people seem to, when they see it and they hear about it, it's not a difficult process, but it is a process that I explain, and it's worked really very well. So you just go to put in the word, one word, Newsvesting, in Amazon.com, and you can buy it right there, or Barnes & Noble as well.
I've got a couple of minutes left, and you know, as you were referencing the price of oil and fracking and all of these issues that come into play, I happened to be out looking for an oil change over the weekend, and I run synthetic, and I saw a sign that said that natural gas is now being turned into synthetic oil, and it struck me there's going to be a market then for natural gas for a long time, just simply on that. So a good investor has to have a wide variety of sources and always have their senses available to pick up all of these things going on around them.
Yeah, you really do. And I always argue that the people in the real world and not on Wall Street, we have a better shot at getting these news stories and understanding them, because we live the real life. We can tell if the economy is good or bad. We can tell from looking at our neighbors and our houses and our bank accounts. I can assure you, Wall Street is just another world up there. There's so much money flowing, and it's a bubble. They all talk to each other. You're much better off in Idaho or Georgia or Florida in being able to decide whether or not a real investment exists or an opportunity, and to ride it ahead of them. Because, like I say, in Wall Street, the fog has to roll in and the lights turned out before they realize what's happened.
I was going to add to that. Every once in a while, though, you will see a bit of a shock where I was listening to the radio driving home yesterday, and you had some some restaurants here in the Northwest that they had an outbreak of E. coli,
Right.
And so once in a great while, if you're an investor, something hits like a ton of bricks like that, you've got to be aware that that there are a few potholes out there too.
Well, that's true, and usually those are great opportunities. For example, when Ebola broke out, and the first patient was admitted who had been on an airplane. I bought American Airlines. Again, I work with my broker. I asked, what's the strongest airline? They said American Airlines. I bought it, held it for 2 weeks, picked up about $7 a share, and sold it. Just to your point.
You got to do a little bit of reading out there, in other words.
That's right. Exactly. You got to keep up with the news, and you've got to know how to distill it, and you have to apply a little logic. So logically, I thought, okay, airlines may suffer to begin with, but where are they going to be able to screen the best for Ebola? It's somewhere, an airport, not a stadium and not out on the street. So in the end, I thought it was a wise move, and it turned out to be a good pick.
Matt Towery, the author of Newsvesting, joining us this morning. I'd like to say thank you, and I wish you great luck with the book sales.
Thanks so much, Bill.
Take care, sir.
Take care.
Matt Towery is a syndicated columnist as well, joining us this morning on the program. And as he mentioned, formerly, he was a state legislator in Georgia and has a close relationship with the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, also a Georgian, we should point out, so in case you were trying to make that connection. And the book is called Newsvesting and available at Amazon.com. We've got more on the way on the program today. Hope you can stick around on this somewhat wintry start to the to November, and Election Day, of course, today will be impacted by all of that. Got some sad news about the refugee crisis and what it may mean for all of us. That's on the way in just a few minutes. Please do stick around.